Make sure you're not rushing into it, even if I know that feeling where you're like, this should have happened yesterday. Welcome to Coaching with Ricky. I'm Ricky, and these are your questions answered. How long do I wait to circle back with my manager on a raise that they promised? Ooh, this is a good one. A couple pitfalls that I see people falling into around this topic. Sometimes it can feel very frustrating, especially if you've waited a long period of time and haven't really brought this up, but you've been feeling a specific way about maybe not getting paid fairly enough, or you feel like you should be getting paid more, or whatever it might be. Sometimes that internal buildup of emotions can come out in a very aggressive way. And that's not how you want to come across, because the key of this kind of conversation is to remove emotions away. So even though we're humans, right, it's impossible to remove all emotions. But in terms of pay discussions, especially ones where there's increase in responsibility and very factually based things that are happening, it's important for you to remain objective and to focus on that as opposed to feeding into your emotions and your frustrations. So even if you might be frustrated, don't let that lead this conversation. Because what I've seen is people fall into this mistake of bringing up the conversation, and then after a day or two, when they don't see action or when they don't hear back, they get frustrated and they follow up again. That doesn't make your manager and other leaders want to help you. So part of this also is a give and take, right? You want to have managers and other leaders be in your court. You want them to help you and you want them to support you. Even if you may feel like you're being treated unfairly, or up until now you feel like the pay increase should have happened a while ago. Just let that go, because the past is the past and you can't change that. What you should be focusing on now is the now. And even with all that frustration, put that aside momentarily and focus back on the core of the conversation, which is I'm doing X, Y, and Z amount of work, and if I'm being asked to do more work, I would like to also then talk about the increase in pay. Or if you've already been doing an increased amount of work, you can say something like, I've already had an increase in my responsibility and I've delivered great work and I enjoyed learning and growing. And at the same time, now I would like to talk about the corresponding increase in pay that should come with an increase in amount of work. Another mistake that I see people falling into around this topic is this sense of urgency. So there's a tendency in us as humans to want to have a conversation that's super uncomfortable and just finish it. But with conversations like pay, and especially changes in pay increases, it takes time. It takes a little bit of time. So you're going to have to be a little bit more patient, because if you rush into this conversation and expect it to be one and done and have it be 30 minutes or an hour, we have this conversation and I want a conclusion, you're likely going to be pretty disappointed. So go in with a little bit of an open mind and allow yourself and your managers a little bit of space, because the worst thing you want to do is to give this sense of urgency or aggression around this topic. Instead, you would want to open up this topic and introduce it in the sense of introducing what's important to you. And in this case, it's pay and how much you're getting paid compared to the amount of work that you're doing. So by approaching it as, I'm going to have this initial conversation as an information sharing session where I'm going to convey to my manager or other leaders that I have an expectation that I want to be paid fairly for the amount of work that I'm doing. And what is the amount of work that I'm doing? X, Y, and Z. And it's appropriate to talk about that during this opening conversation. But the mistake would be if you then expect an immediate response and an immediate approval and an immediate change in your pay. That's pretty unrealistic, and I've rarely seen that happen. Usually how this plays out is you have this introductory conversation and open it up, and you should always end with, what do you think? Or can you help me better understand the process of this? Or can you help me better understand what the timeline of this looks like? That is an open-ended question that you can ask your manager to allow you to better understand what the expectations are in terms of where is this conversation going to go, and how can we ultimately work together to get to the outcome that you want, which is an increase in pay, to match the increase in scope of responsibility or work that you're doing. So make sure you're not rushing into it, even if I know that feeling where you're like, this should have happened yesterday. Just remember that things take time, and things like this usually isn't just a decision that your manager can make on their own. They probably have to ladder it up to their manager and their manager's managers, and that takes time. And if you don't already have this, make sure you have a career development discussion with your manager or your manager's manager. And sometimes when we talk about career development, that can really complement conversations like this where we talk about our pay or our salary. And that also creates this forum and this space that you have with your manager to naturally talk about the work that you're doing and the areas that you want to continue to grow on. And this needs to be separate time from your normal one-on-ones with your manager, because those are typically more focused on the tactical aspects of every week. You're talking about what's happening with work, and as things come up, you troubleshoot and you problem solve together. But this should be separate, dedicated time focused on your own development. And the beauty of this kind of conversation that you set aside every 1 or 2 months with your manager is because it allows this forum and space to talk about your work that you're delivering on and also the corresponding pay. So it's almost like a nicely planned meeting that you can have with your manager, and it removes the uncomfortableness and it removes the pressure of, oh, I have to set up this separate meeting to talk about my pay. When you can have that pay discussion coupled with this ongoing career development discussion. Because at the end of the day, there are 2 things that are important to have ongoing discussions with your manager about. One is your continuous growth in your career, and 2 is how happy you are and what's important to you. It's a two-way street. So the more that you're able to share with your manager and upper management in terms of what's important to you and what keeps you happy, the easier their lives will be, because if they have an intention to keep you around and if they have an intention to keep you happy, then they'll have exactly what they need in order to do that if you're constantly communicating to them what's important to you. Very fun question as usual, and I'm looking forward to answering more of your questions in the future. Bye for now.